Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our program is about family stories, fact or fiction. How do you separate the two? Our first speaker today is AJ Cassel. She's joining us from sunny Arizona, and so we're dealing with a time frame difference here and internet problems. So we've had a good morning already. AJ is from Alexandria, Kentucky, but she spent much of her life in Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. She's a retired teacher who is now doing online school with her grandchildren, as many of you are doing online school with your kids and grandkids right now as well. She is a descendant of Pendleton County and Peter Howe. His son Ansel was an attorney here, and that is that's who she descends from. She's going to talk about a little family story today involving the number of children in that family. So I'm going to let AJ get started, and we'll stop her and ask questions if we need to as we go along. Okay? You're on, AJ.
Hi, Fran.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, everything's coming through good and clear.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll go ahead and start and tell my story, which began in 2012 when I made a trip back to Kentucky. Parents' remains at the Butler Cemetery. And I was retired then and became interested as a result of this trip in where my ancestors had come from. I began with my Howe ancestors and soon encountered two family stories which were supported or I could not find. Can you see the screen?
No. You'll have to, did you click on the share screen button down at the bottom?
Oh, shoot. Share screen.
It's down at the very bottom. There you go.
Now, can you see it?
You'll have to click on which screen you want to share, I think. Yeah, there we go. We've got it. Just a little delay in the transmission. We're good.
Okay. Well, one of the first sources that I found very helpful was the E.E. Barton files. And my great-grandfather, Ansel Howe, wrote a number of pages for the Barton files. And from the family papers and the Barton files, I learned that my second great-grandparents, Peter and Elizabeth Howe, had come to this country from England with their families. Peter came, his family came into Philadelphia in 1819, and then my grandfather Ansel wrote that Elizabeth Drabble Howe came to America when she was 12 years old. She entered in New York, went to Philadelphia, and about 1828, where she married Peter. They got married in 1835. Then she and Peter moved to Peach Grove in Pendleton County, and in 1937-38 moved to Lick Creek, which was near Butler. Oh, I'm having trouble here. I also found among the family papers a family tree, and then a cousin of mine from Kentucky sent me a family group sheet. And this is where I found the first mystery. Notice on the family tree that for Peter and Elizabeth, there are 10 children. From the research that I had done that far, I only knew about the last 5. I hadn't found any information about the first 5 children. Then when I was comparing the group sheet and the family tree, I noticed some other discrepancies. There's a Matilda Sarah Howe that was on the tree, but she's not mentioned on the group sheet. And then on the group sheet, there's a William Howe that was not included in the family tree. So already we added a few more mysteries to this. Then, to make things a little more complicated, when I went to the 1850 census for Peter and Elizabeth, there were only their names, none of the children. There should have been 5 or 6 children that would have been listed on the census at this time, but none of them were there. When I checked the 1960 census, I found Peter Howe, Elizabeth, my great-grandfather Ansel, Delia, Julia, George, and then Francis, who was Elizabeth's father. Again, no mention of the children. On the 1970, there was Peter, Elizabeth, Ansel, Julia, George, and Peter Morgan Lee. They called him Peter, but his name was Morgan Lee. And on the 1800 census, Peter's on the previous page, then Elizabeth, Ansel, Julia. Of course, the one daughter, Delia, had died in 1865, and then George and Morgan. So I'm at a point now where I haven't found any information at all about the 5 or 6 children who were born before 1850. Then I became friends with a cousin, Joy Howe Williams, on Ancestry, and we began emailing in January of 2013. And the first email that I had from her, she said there was one question that she had. Do you have any knowledge of Peter and Elizabeth Drabble? No, she uses the maiden name Howe, having children prior to your grandfather's birth. She went on to say that it was her understanding there were 5 children who had died of tuberculosis. And after that happened, Peter and Elizabeth had continued to have more children rebuild their family. So she's also at the same time looking for information about these missing children. Now, I was a descendant of Ansel, the oldest child that we knew of. She was a descendant of the youngest one, Morgan Lee. So we came from 2 lines of the family, and both of us are looking or had heard the same story. Then in March 27, rechecking the census records, and I don't know why it took me 3 years to figure this out, but on the 1900 census, in addition to the other information about, widowed, the date of birth, there is a section that says mother of how many children and number of these children who are living. And so there on the 1900 census was the confirmation that Elizabeth had had 11 children, and in 1900, 4 of them were living. Of course, the 4 that were living were my great-grandfather, Ansel, and Julia Jane, George, and then Joy's descendant, Morgan Lee. So it had taken 3 years
Wow.
to simply find out on the 1900 census the answer to the question. Then, after the fact, my cousin Carolyn, who had also been working on this, found 1850 mortality index or schedule for Pendleton County. And on this index was Elman Howe and William Howe. Those would have been the oldest of the unknown children. William was an infant, born in October, died in October, and Elman was about 18 months old, and he died in December of 1849.
Wow.
At the same time that I was looking for the missing children, I was also looking for a missing burial site. In the Barton files, Ansel had written that his father, Peter, was buried in a Williams farm lot adjoining Butler. In another document, Ansel had written that Peter was buried in Grant Cemetery. When I was visiting Kentucky in 2012, I had found with no problem, because it was in the Butler Cemetery, the gravestone of Elizabeth, born 1816, 1908. And I also found later on an obit for Elizabeth. So Elizabeth had a stone, and she'd had an obit. There was a funeral, but nothing on, nothing on Peter, simply that he had died in 1900. In November of 2012, after I returned from Kentucky, I became acquainted with Bev Graver. And Bev was a member of the Pendleton County Historical Genealogical Society, and she did a lot of genealogy work and posted memorials on a website called Find a Grave. So I had found the Williams Grant Cemetery on Find a Grave, but there were only 2 memorials at that cemetery. So I contacted Bev, who had posted the 2 memorials, and said, did you find any other any stone for Peter Howe there? Bev wrote me back and said that in the fall of 2012, she and another volunteer, Suzanne Taylor, had gone to the Williams Grant Cemetery, and at that time it was in a mess. Vandals had come in and destroyed or taken some of the stones and broken up others, but she had not found anything about Peter Howe, but she had found Delia Ann's stone, and they'd cleaned it up, and she sent me a photo of that. So in January of 2013, I shared the information about Delia's stone with my cousin, Joy Williams. And Joy wrote to me that Peter was buried out on a ridge in Butler. My dad knows where it is, within 250 feet or so. He said he remembers his grandfather, Morgan Lee, always saying he wanted to save up and buy a headstone for the gravesite, but unfortunately never did before he died. So there is no marker, just an unmarked stone. So throughout 2013 and 14, I continued to seek information in every small cemetery I came around that was anywhere near Butler, I was looking for Peter Howe. Then in November of 2014, Joy wrote that she and her dad had driven to Butler and gone to the Williams Grant Cemetery. Now, it had been many years since her father Clyde had been there, and I don't think either one of them were expecting the town had grown that much. So what had once been a rural area was now in the town. And her father, you know, nothing looked familiar to him. He had no idea, you know, where the small stone might be. Plus, they were unable that day to find Delia's stone. So I suggested to Joy that she contact Suzanne Taylor and get the location of Delia's stone. And maybe there was a chance that Peter's stone would be nearby. In January 2015, Joy returned with her husband to the Williams Grant Cemetery. And this time, knowing where to look for Delia's stone, they were able to locate next to Delia's headstone or nearby a small stone marker. And this is what it looked like. And Joy said, with that information and the close proximity of Delia's, it simply had to be Peter's stone. There were no other small stones around there except for this one stone. So at this point, I mean, everybody's pretty excited that we had found it. And Joy's family wanted to get a headstone, the headstone that Clyde had talked with his grandfather about many years ago for Peter. So I put Joy in touch with Jonathan Peoples, who the Peoples family and my family had been friends for many, many years. And Jonathan and Joy worked together to design the headstone, and they made a decision to put both names, Delia's and Peter's, on the new headstone because Jonathan said there was no way of cleaning up Delia's stone to the point that you'd be able to read it. It was becoming so eroded. Joy also said that at first they discussed replacing Peter's marker, which is right over here. But somehow it just didn't seem to appropriate to remove what had been placed 115 years ago. And Jonathan said that there would be room in between the two stones for the new headstone. So that's what they decided to do. Then we planned a dedication and invited people. I was the furthest one away, coming from Tucson, and there were, you know, some other relatives from Cincinnati, etc. But we met at the Williams Grant Cemetery at 11 o'clock and had the dedication of the stone. Now, these really are the neat people that had worked to find the stone. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to find it without the help of all these people. That's Joy. She's my fourth cousin. That's Suzanne Taylor. And Suzanne and I found out are related through marriage on my mother's side of the family. That's Clyde. And Clyde would be a second cousin once removed. That's Bev Graver. Bev and I found out when we started working that we're fourth cousins through the Fryer family. Myself, and then my cousin Carolyn Q, she's second cousin. So the only people that I knew prior to 2012 was Carolyn. The other people I didn't even know about when I first started on this.
Genealogy does that.
50 people yeah, that attended the dedication, and it goes clear on around. We circled part of the cemetery,
Right.
and then afterwards had a luncheon in not Crittenden, but someplace in Grant County. Now I forgot where we had the luncheon. You get on those country roads. I learned to drive on country roads when I was with my grandparents one summer, but I'm lost now when I come back there.
I can understand.
Right. But I think what I learned from this is that one of the things you have to do is keep looking. It may not be continuous. You look for a little while and then you set it aside and then you come back to it. And I mean, I knew about the census records soon after I first started, and I don't know how many 1900 census records I'd been, that I'd looked at until like all of a sudden, oh my gosh. And, then it comes. The other thing I think that's been really important to me on the research is the contacts with people. People that I've found on the Find a Grave website, on Ancestry. I joined the Pendleton County Historical Genealogical Society. I get their newsletter. You just meet all these people and you start talking, and I don't know, I've decided if you were born in northern Kentucky, you walk into a cemetery and you're probably related to about 80 to 90% of the people in that cemetery.
And that's true, I think.
Yeah, no
so.
matter where you live. So it's been, it's been an exciting adventure. And the one other thing I'd mention on the Williams Grant Cemetery is that in 2012 it was in a mess, and then Suzanne and Bev came in and started cleaning it up, and then the city of Butler also provided some money and helped clean up the cemetery. And I think this type of thing is really important, that people that, do all the work on the old cemeteries that have just been forgotten. So,
yes, very much.
Anyhow, that's my story.
So you're telling us, look back over your research, pay close attention to your census records, and make those connections out there to find out more about your family, right?
Right, exactly. And that makes, and you have fun in the process.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, AJ. I thank you so much today for joining us. We really appreciate you being here and taking your time to share this story with you. And it's an incredible story. You did find, did you find all of the kids that were missing originally? Did you eventually find all 11?
No, let me, let's see if I can, I think I have to click back through. I don't know how to go just to one. I'm too new at this.
You're fine.
Okay. The only two that we were able to confirm were Elman and then William. The last two. Matilda, Francis, Peter Henry Harrison, and Elizabeth Jane, we have not found anything on those. And the other thing I'm not certain about is Peter and Elizabeth lived, were married in Philadelphia, and there are family that are buried in Philadelphia. I don't know, like 1836, Ansel mentioned that in 1837-38 they moved to Lick Creek, and that they had, you know, near Butler, that they had come into the county, into Peach Grove. So, you know, I'm not sure on Elizabeth Jane whether she could have been born in Philadelphia and
Right.
come down with them, or
Right.
you know, what arrived in Pendleton County. But I mean, I've looked Pennsylvania, just nothing. We haven't found anything on those.
Well, I hope that you
Haven't found any
do.
mortality.
I hope that eventually you're
What?
able to find, I said, I hope that eventually you're able to find more about them. Like you said, just keep hanging in there and keep working at it, right? So I thank you very much.
And we had
Oh.
we had the death date, you know, of Matilda Sarah, 1862, but unless for some reason she was adopted out to someone else, you know, prior to 1850, she didn't appear on any of the, you know, other census records. So still a mystery, another mystery.
And mysteries are fun.
Right.
I thank you again for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing this story with us. For those of you who are watching, we have a second half of this program, and we will be talking with Tina Bootle about her family story. So just stay tuned for that. Thank you very much.